Hi, I'm Greg Nadeau, publisher of InfraTalk America. This episode of the InfraTalk podcast was recorded from our studio at the 2023 AASHTO Annual Meeting in Indianapolis, Indiana. It features a conversation with Trimble's Director of Strategy for State and Federal Government, Doug Reichard, and Senior Manager for Proposals and Grants, Patrick Holtz. We discuss the Federal Highway Administration's Advanced Digital Construction Management System Technology Grants, the role of open data standards in advancing digital project delivery, and how utilizing asset lifecycle management brings informed decisions and better, more sustainable outcomes. This is the InfraTalk America podcast. Our thanks to Trimble for sponsoring this episode. Welcome to InfraTalk America. For our audience, Trimble is what we call an alliance partner of our company. And for over 5 years now, I've worked with Trimble in an advisory capacity, mainly federal policy, which led to other incredible pursuits. The last 5 years has been an education for me in understanding what we have sort of, the industry term of digital project delivery, which encompasses a wide range of solutions in terms of how we more efficiently and effectively deliver projects in our particular focus area, the federal aid highway program space. So 52 state DOTs in the country, all evolving to find solutions to more efficiently and effectively deliver projects. So that's kind of the business we're in. But Trimble, when I first became affiliated back in 2017-18, we began the conversation because what Trimble was interested in is how do we help advance the state of practice of the technology? It wasn't about how do we advance, and certainly not in the relationship we had because we don't have those skill sets in terms of marketing specific products. So I've always admired the philosophy of the Trimble CEO, Rob Painter, is, the rising tide will lift all boats. So how do we as an industry help state DOTs advance their utilization of technology? So that became the mission, and that became our mission. So fast forward today, and we've launched InfraTalk America, and our focus is to essentially tell that story. Sure. And Trimble's been such an important part of helping us tell that story, because not only does Trimble provide important sponsorship to enable us to produce the content that we produce, but the expertise of people like yourselves who can help us understand the complexities of what's going on. So that's the broad setup about the conversation we want to have today. Sure. And so two kind of specific categories. One is the Advanced Digital Construction Management System Grants. ADCMS is what we're referred to them as. And ADCMS was a program that Congress enacted first in the appropriations process in 2020. And that was an effort that Trimble was very much behind and supporting. And I was pleased to be involved in helping to craft an idea that could be advanced with the very talented team at Trimble. And very receptive audience in the congressional committees of jurisdiction, very interested in seeing what they could do to help. And the discretionary program, federal grants for states, generally speaking, is a practice that's been going on for a long time, and a practice I've been particularly supportive of over the years, because it's one of the few ways that the federal government, because the relationship between federal highway and the states is governed by federal law. And what it says in the law is federally assisted and state administered is how the law explains the federal aid highway program, which means 52 state DOTs have a lot of discretion as to how they go about doing their business, with certain policy parameters that the federal law provides. But for the most part, they make those decisions. Federal highway can influence through resources to some degree, but cannot mandate certain practices. So that's that sets the table. And as we're recording this interview at the AASHTO, American Association of State and Highway Transportation Officials, and that is meeting this year in Indianapolis, Indiana. And we're recording this conversation a couple of days before the Federal Highway Administrator is expected to announce the first round of grants from the ADCMS program. Now, Patrick Holtz has been involved with your team to provide whatever support you could to state DOTs who are interested in organizing and preparing an application to compete for the funding. So having your, insights, having spent the last several months living with this stuff and doing what you could to support state DOTs, I think we can have a good conversation about ADCMS and the potential of it and what we hope it'll accomplish and some sense of kind of the applications that are out there, which we'll see, at least the successful ones on Thursday. But
this was a fascinating experience. I've worked in public policy and federal programs for over 20 years, and I can't think of a more satisfying experience than this first round of ADCMS.
Can you just give us a couple of examples of your prior experience? Because it's very relevant for this conversation, I think.
I cut my teeth on Capitol Hill. I worked for Congressman Steve LaTourette, who was a longtime member of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee. And then having never rode a motorcycle in my life, I was a Washington representative for the American Motorcyclists Association. I did that through, as many folks in transportation, we measure ourselves in authorization bills. That was through T21 reauthorization and then what became MAP 21. And then I was fortunate enough to represent some of the largest owners in the country within every mode, from aviation to transit to rail, the subway. The Port Authority of Newark, New Jersey, LA subway system, Dallas subway system.
You ran an MPO.
I also then went into service and went back home to Cleveland, Ohio to help run the MPO for Cleveland, Ohio as their principal planner. And then came to Trimble to help start up our state DOT practice about 5 years ago. But when I look at ADCMS, it really was educating folks of a vision of a single source of truth through the life cycle of a project, and then the dream, which is to do that within a program, and to get to the point where we call like the race to the starting line, as we got before the NOFO came out. And it was just to educate the DOTs about this underlying program, this underlying vision, but also then the can-do know-how just to do it. I mean, the idea of a DOT to do a discretionary grant, regardless of ADCMS, was new. And then to make sure that those folks are talking to the relevant people within their DOTs to submit. And that itself was a satisfying experience. It was just people that we interact with over the last 5 years to educate them on ADCMS is one thing. The other thing is just that they can do it is another. And that's one thing I loved.
Was it 18 that we worked with?
We worked with several, and I think even then in saying that, though, Doug, it's important just how oversubscribed this program was, that we had, I think, over 30, we think, that may have participated in. And I'm always looking to the next reauthorization bill. And
right. And another important point to underscore, the total amount of money that was made available for this round was $34 million of the total of the $100 million was programmed over 5 years. This represented the first and second year of funding because delays in getting the program out the door, which is not uncommon with given the volume of discretionary programs that came out of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So it really provides some real insight. Right. And $34 million was made available in this first round, and it was oversubscribed, 4 times oversubscribed. So over $100 million in request. I think 31 or 35, I've heard both numbers, number of applications, which represents number of states. So what it demonstrated was a real interest, a real demand for resources to help advance these technologies. So So
And I think
oversubscribed means underfunded to me. So I think we have to start looking for it, because the resources available in the second round next year is going to be 17 million.
Right.
So we're going in the wrong direction. This is something, and we have to do it now. And I'll tell you why in a minute.
All these programs are interesting, and I love kind of that each round has a narrative and the program itself has a narrative. And I think ADCMS has the potential to go hyperspace as a relevant program within FHWA when, regardless of even the underlying funding levels, when a DOT is able to connect ADCMS with some of the larger programs within FHWA, your infra grant, your build grant, and that they are then two ships heading in the same direction that you can submit within both, I think would be curious.
You can leverage it.
Absolutely. And then also just after this, it's the human part of a grant is, and I've said this to the DOTs over the summertime, is that there's just an argument for hanging in there. And generally when you hang in there with FHWA, you will be rewarded. And irregardless of what happens here in round one is to talk to those DOTs immediately. They'll get an opportunity to be debriefed on what might have been a gap in project description or the budget table, but it's really, there's a human quality to discretionary grants of just hanging in there. And the great news is that in talking to the DOTs, I know that they will. These are very industrious, hardworking folks.
And a lot of support. Again, I spoke of the history and the sort of genesis of this of the development of this program, and over time, of course, other industry members have supported. We've had contractors. I think the first evidence of real contractor support, AASHTO had produced a policy statement almost 3 years ago.
Right. Yeah. It was right after I started with Trimble.
A program that involves, potential of requiring contractors to do certain things certain ways is always challenging because they've been doing business a certain way for a long time with the Federal Aid Highway Program. So any change is always challenging. But this was widely accepted. ARTBA, again, and the AGC of America has also established a committee focusing on this. So you've got broad contractor support, and ADCMS has helped that. So we've got a lot of support, which is what helped, not only obviously contractors, other software vendors.
And don't take our word for it. I mean, look at FHWA and what they said within the NOFO of what selection will hinge on, your ability to be interoperable and then collaboration. I mean, in a former life, when I was working on discretionary grants and service, you would have liked to have a letter of support from the private sector that helping working on project descriptions were kind of sometimes at arm's length. This program is the opposite. The real thinking is collaboration and working together. And in that same way, that means not specific point solutions necessarily, but working with other companies with states, because it is about the movement of data through the life cycle.
Great segue.
Rising tides lift all boats.
Rising tides lift all boats. And let's talk about why it's important. Why now? This program is going to provide resources for state DOTs to help them pursue this course. Now, Doug, you spent a lot of time working on the sort of big picture stuff associated with this, and have some real knowledge that you can share with our audience. There's a lot of work going on in AASHTO committees, in what they call NCHRP studies. 21 states, I think, is the number that's involved in that. They're all looking in one way, shape, or form. It's part of the effort to develop what we call open standards. Can you help us understand? So we've got the resources that the federal government has provided to states to help them move this along. Not enough. Soon we can address that. But the other factor being, in terms of the progression of the advancement of digital project delivery, what role does the development of open standards play? How is that going to help accelerate? Just give us the tutorial on how this works and why it's important.
My favorite way to describe this, Greg, is if you are in Europe and you try to take an American plug and stick it in the wall, it doesn't fit, right? So open data standards it's the equivalent of everybody in the world using the same kind of plug, right? So now all of a sudden data can move. It can move from place to place. It can connect between internal systems to Trimble, but more importantly, external systems to Trimble. It's imperative that data is able to flow and be where it needs, when it needs to be there, and in the way it needs to be consumed. If we can, as an industry, so it's already started, right? We've got IFC 4.3 that is now available. It's being utilized by some.
IFC, can you just explain what IFC is?
Industry foundation classes. It's a data standard. Okay. And it's the standard
international?
That it is.
Yep.
And the governing body that establishes these standards let's put it this way, it's been accepted by AASHTO as the standard that the DOTs are being advised by Federal Highways and AASHTO. That's the future. Okay. That's where we're going, right?
And just in simple, maybe too simple terms, but effectively that means software developers like Trimble,
yes,
are designing the software to that standard, as are their competitors and other companies. The result of that is a uniformity? It
is. And
does that accelerate the pace of software development? Does it provide what advantage does that provide to the states? You can't
do BIM without design standards and something like IFC that draws it all together. And I know you've talked about Norway on your podcast many times, but that was one of the first things they did over there was to establish a data standard so that not just the DOT or the Department of Transportation, but the contractors and the consultants that they work with are also all on the same page. So that data can go. And they do everything, almost all of their projects over there, like design build, as opposed to design bid build, where they're not even done with the design when they start construction. Right. So they're able to iterate because that data can move and actually be designing as they're building, because things happen on a job site. Like, you have to be more flexible and you have to be able to meet deadlines and deal with the day-to-day stuff that just comes up. And if you don't have that flexibility built into your processes, you can't do it.
I almost feel like sometimes when we talk about this stuff, it's like it's almost like a philosophy class. To get out of the project. And we would have thought 3 years ago how revolutionary it is to do that single source of truth within the project. But what Doug is suggesting, like, for example, what's been done in Norway, is now you're into the program. And that's really interesting. And then if you pull that then to the DOTs, it's the thinking of, does the STIP look different in the future? Is it a much more dynamic document? It's the intention to have that data inform your design programs or construction programs, not just the project, but asset management programs altogether.
Right. Well, imagine that, like, just being able to deliver in a predictable fashion a STIP. Like, you can more accurately manage your costs.
What state DOTs have to produce every 2 years, the State Transportation Improvement Program, which governs what projects they're going to build.
Right, so, and that would be greatly affected if they're able to they can predict, like, when, look, this one's not going over budget. Like, we know what's going to happen because we're all operating in synchronization, right?
Can you give an example of, we keep talking about digital project delivery and how to advance and create more efficiencies. How about an example of, and obviously feel free to use a Trimble example, but an example of technology that particularly our audience, we hope,
sure.
and includes a range of policy folks.
Sure.
And especially we focus on the state level. Help them understand why this is important with a real example.
So a real example, I mean, I'll name a piece of technology used by Trimble called Quadri. Okay. All right. So this is it's a data hub for a project. So when it operates at a very, very high level of detail. I won't go into feature sets and things like that, because that's just going to bore the audience here. But it operates at a very high level of detail and enables data to move throughout the asset lifecycle, starting in planning, like in the earliest phases of a project. As soon as a model is created, a 3D model is created, that data gets attached to objects in that model, a curb, a gutter, a road surface. And that data, making that journey throughout the process, enables wonderful and amazing things to happen when they go to operate those assets.
Certainly
after they built
versus
them.
using a bunch of blueprints and paper plans.
Exactly. You know,
which is what
that,
this replaces.
It's flat files, right? You're replacing. You have the ability to associate data with a 3D iteration of a project, and it makes the whole journey all the way into asset management as designed, as built, and as maintained. That's what they do in Norway that nobody else does. And they literally maintain their entire road and rail network in over 1,800 models inside of this solution. We've told this story to the DOTs, and the DOTs hear it, and they're scared. They're intimidated that that's not achievable. But through pilot programs and many DOTs that we're working with, they're starting to realize, actually, this is going to help us get there faster, because accelerating that pace of digital adoption is really the crux of what we're trying to do. We're trying to just enable the DOTs, and we're not all things to all people. We don't have, like, global domination is not Trimble's thing. Our thing is to integrate with our contemporaries wherever necessary to allow that data to move where it needs to be and the way it needs to be there to be consumed.
Interoperability, integration,
Right.
are common phrases that are explaining
Amen.
where we have to go because of the number of moving parts and the number of players involved in a project's delivery is important to consider.
Yes.
And the technology you're describing enables everyone to have access to information instantly and immediately. So, for example, imagine a change to a set of plans, paper plans. And that change has got to be shared and distributed among a number of players involved in the project delivery process, as opposed to everybody having immediate access to
Right.
digital files that have whatever changes we're talking about right there. So it minimizes and reduces the possibility of mistakes dramatically.
Yes.
And in your business, mistakes cost money in the project delivery business. So I've often referred to an analysis that Trimble folks did in Norway on a project that resulted in an estimate of 90 to 95% reduction as a result of really, I call full digital. A 95% reduction in change orders.
That's right.
Is staggering.
Well, and Greg,
In terms of cost savings,
Yeah.
it could mean billions to
Yeah.
our program over a decade.
I think just putting the gauntlet down. Doug and I were both on it. I think is an aha moment when this presentation was given to Caltrans, and Caltrans rightly said, "Well, why did that happen?" And they just simply said, "Well, we just made the decision not to do change orders anymore. Like, it's just we're not going to do that.
They're not necessary.
And
For those of you who aren't in this business, that's huge.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
from the standpoint of it saves time, it saves money, and in many ways, it contributes to the sustainability of building the project.
And it's almost like it's a value. It's just that committing to a value and accepting a value. And
Agencies have they need to be good stewards of public funding. And if they're going to do that, you want to be as efficient as you can and make the best use of that funding. And that's a mission. And, like, if you look at the goals and the business plans for all the different DOTs, that's being good stewards of public funding is usually in the top 10.
Right.
And right next to safety
Yep.
and all the other things that are just hugely important. So there's a reduction of risk for that money. There's all these things that play into it. But reality is they're still operating at a level that is 20 years behind some of these advanced countries and whatnot, but they're trying. And our goal is just to help them step on the gas, right? What can we do?
I think, Doug, I think you're totally right. And it not only is it just, in dealing with the change management, which is the idea of new technology, my hope is that when you go from the project and into the program, DOTs can really tackle, I think, which is the elephant in the room, it's just growth. And that if you are a state that is growing, if you're growing, you're adding capacity. If you're adding capacity, there's more construction. We're from Cleveland, Ohio, is where Doug and I are from. And we're Cleveland Guardians fans. It's a place that's struggling on these questions. And in that same way, that's its own challenge. And you still have, in the case of where we're from, there's capacity for a population half its size. And so it becomes that much more important to be able to do predictive analysis.
Right.
Because irregardless of whether your region is growing or not, you have fixed funding. And so you can then do that in a meaningful way. What I would say is you're now truly practicing asset management.
Right.
Asset lifecycle management. Can you explain that? It's almost a theme of Trimble's.
Yeah, it's how we have built our business for construction owners. And what it means to us, everybody kind of has their own version of that. But like what it means to us is the ability for that data to flow throughout the asset life cycle so that better informed decisions happen and ultimately better outcomes happen. But the real benefit of asset lifecycle management is to help the states reduce the total cost of ownership of the assets that they create. Because they spend, 10% of the budget building it, and then they spend the rest of the 90% of that total cost of ownership maintaining it. And by making better decisions early on, making the data available in 3D, not flat files, for when they're managing and maintaining these assets, the opportunity to reduce total cost of ownership by up to 40%. Think about that for a minute. 40%.
Can you explain that?
Yeah.
A little more?
Yeah. So I'm basically, well, just think of it. If I could save a state 2% on the cost of their pavement, that justifies any technology investment they would ever want to make, right? And if I can save 40% on something like a bridge, that's significant. And that is what results when you utilize data and you use asset lifecycle management, to its fullest. And it's everybody's intimidated by this, but it's not that hard. It can be done.
And the easier thing to do, and it tends to be what's done, is that then we're just going to focus on paving condition ratings and then do kind of a worst to first approach on project selection.
Right.
And like I said, that's just not going to optimize the program or the system.
Right.
One of the things I like, one of the reason I'm focusing on, we focus on the policy folks, is what I think it's important for the policymakers at the state level.
Right.
Whether you're a legislator, or legislative staff, or a governor's office, they need to understand that supporting resources for their state DOT to do the kinds of things we're talking about in this conversation is critical. They've got to understand. I mean, I helped run a DOT for 7 years, and I understand the demands of legislators. They want more paving, they want more bridges than you're ever able to afford. But so expending resources on anything else is a problem. Well, this is going to result in more resources available for more paving and more bridges because of the kinds of savings you just described.
And this is a result of, if you go from handover through design, construct, build, operate, maintain. If you look at that continuum, at every handover, right, between planning to pre-design to design, at every one of those steps, you're lucky if you are able, and under current practices, you're lucky if 10% of the data that's created during that time actually makes it to the next phase. So think about that for a minute. And that's, if you're able to make that a linear and capture all of it, that's what results in the total cost of ownership reducing as much as it does, because that data makes the journey and you have complete data sets to be able to do what you need to do. and maintain those assets. And it changes prioritization, and it enables DOTs to go from a preventive methodology for asset management to a predictive.
Right.
And that's where, I mean, we haven't even talked about AI and machine learning yet in asset management,
Doug,
but we could. That's just another lever that we can pull to step on the gas.
Most people hadn't heard of AI till a year ago.
Yes, right?
A chance to honor the father of CMGC contracts is what you're really saying there. I mean, when we first started this exercise, we wrote down on a board, single source of truth through the lifecycle project. We realized that we got to find opportunities where all the parties are in the same room: the designers, the general contractors,
right,
and the DOTs and owners. And we stumbled our way onto what's the CMGC, or contract manager general contract.
Construction manager general contract, something like that.
Is that the acronym?
I think so.
I don't know. But Greg, in your time there at FHWA, promoted that, and this was actually
round one of Everyday Counts.
Yeah, there you go.
I got to tell you, that was an aha moment for our team 4 years ago. And that's where we're able to demonstrate this proposition.
The enemy of digital project delivery is design, bid, build. I'll just say it. I mean, it is the most inefficient way of doing things. And the more states, like progressive states like California and others that are using not just CMGC, but they're starting to adopt progressive design build. And then
it's
just design build is a
design
huge
build.
move.
Just for policy friends, is you can equate it to a low bid.
Right.
And
design, bid, build.
It's, and it's what most states do for most cookie cutter projects.
Right.
And in some cases, that's justified to some degree. But by and large, for me, I've always said low bid equates to lowest common denominator. Right. It's contractors showing up who want to win the bid, and I don't blame them. They're in the business of trying to win bids. So you're going to sharpen that pencil, you're going to cut back, you're going to do what you can, and you're going to make it up. Often end up making it up in change orders.
Right. We're going to grease a point on a project where it's either...
That's
the way they
been
can
the
get
pattern for decades.
Exactly. They change order their way to profitability, and that just is inherently wrong.
And to our friends in the contractor community, we're not suggesting anything nefarious.
No.
It's how you have to do business in a design, bid, build environment if you want to be successful.
Exactly. Well, cash flow is king for a contractor. Like they got to keep money going through their business. Right. And if they can eke out 3 or 4% on a job, it's design, bid, build, they've done it. They've achieved, and that's impressive. Wouldn't it be
well said?
It would be wonderful if we had a world that, well, in Norway, they did 80%. When they started the journey to go digital, 80% of their contracts were design, bid, build. Now it's 80% of them are design, build. And their version of design build is a little different than ours here. And the way their legal system functions is a little different than ours, and liabilities and things like that are looked at. But that's the point, right? They knew that one of the first things they did is they went to work on the contract language, because they're like, man, doing it this way is not going to work. So we need to go design build, and then they kind of created their version of it.
And then Doug, it goes even then to the role of Trimble and in that process. And it's something only we kind of discovered on our own is this: there's such a human quality as you kind of work with all the partners as they pull that data through the life cycle. And that Trimble became kind of and the parts we were working on, that steward to hold your hand as you go. If there was a design defect, that's got to be communicated somehow. We found that we were sometimes in that role. That's just to be that steward as they kind of cross that chasm through the life cycle. And that was actually something I think we discovered and learned as we worked on those projects.
Well, Everyday Counts 6, which for those, Everyday Counts is a 2-year cycle. So EDC 6 was really the 11th and 12th year of the program. And there was an initiative that covered both something called e-ticketing and digital as-built. And digital as-built is how they captured this. You'll hear terms like digital as-built, you hear terms like BIM and open BIM, being building information, I'm acronym
modeling.
Building information modeling. I almost said management. And which is a process utilized heavily and extensively for a long time in the vertical building business. But in the horizontal business, the highway and bridge sector, if you will, relatively new. So how does the technology, the contracting method, how does the initiative I was talking about, EDC 6, really began a 2-year process of taking what had been 6 years of effort before that. I mean, a lot of years went into collaboration between federal highway and state DOTs in various aspects of this over time. But so how would you're in the field, you've talked to a lot of state DOTs about this specific, where are we at? Give me, as we come in for a landing, we could talk about this all day, but give me your sense of the state of practice today and where you think we'll be. And
well, here's what's happening now, right? All the DOTs they have the data. They have it. It's coming in via survey. Like like survey practices alone and inspection practices, they have the data, right? And I've not talked to a DOT that is not using a drone these days for photogrammetry, and their LiDAR. The DOTs are LiDAR scanning their road networks. The data's there. We just need we need to help them make use of it. Turn the lights on. It's dark data, right? It lives in a dark closet until you turn the lights on. And the way you turn the lights on is by giving it the context of a project and a 3D model. And by putting that data into a 3D model, the whole world, it's not just turning the lights on, it's illuminating a universe of possibility. And I know this sounds a little wonky, but like it really is the ability to now look at projects differently and asset management differently than we ever have before. And when we use the term digital twin, it's an aspiration for every DOT. I don't like the term. Everybody has their version of it. The only real digital twin that I know of is what Norway does with their entire road and rail network in 3D models. And yes, it's in Trimble technology, but it truly is. The data flows in, the data flows out, and it has to be a bidirectional relationship in order to be able to achieve this. So where are we at? We're at the beginning of helping the DOTs leverage that data. We're at the beginning of that journey, and they are mostly receptive. The challenges are contemporaries that have proprietary technology that don't like to play with others. We're the anti of that. Like everything we do is open. Everything we do is based on API level connections that enables that data to flow from our systems, other systems. We don't really care. We sincerely want the DOTs to be successful. And the way that we do that is by saying we're not proprietary. We're open to everything, and we will work with everybody.
So important.
And we walk the walk.
I think you're going to have to see that.
AASHTO will tell you that.
We'll go hyperspace when there's just some practical things in the C-suite that this gets at. For one, when you have every state has their projects of national and regional significance that are competing in these large programs, losing round after round after round. And when you realize that this is the hinge on you being successful on funding that project of national regional significance, that will be interesting if that connection is made. And then in another practical way, I mean, I only say this from experience, is that as everyone has their favorite projects, when chief engineers no longer are talking to DOT secretaries and saying, hey, I need you to fund this project, and not to suggest that an entire adoption of a Moneyball approach to project selection. But at least what I found in my background was when we had the analytics discern what was the biggest bang for the buck, it gave us something to say to that chief engineer. Like, hey, listen, we can't fund you this year, but these are these other projects we're going to get to because we have to do predictive analysis. But just that you'd have an answer for that, other than just, it's my favorite project and it needs to get funded.
Yeah, the best answers are always backed by data.
You go back to the worst to first, and it's just the idea to go into predictive analysis. And these are the things, these are the questions that DOT secretaries have. They are answerable to their government. governors
Right.
on these big grants, and then also in that same way in the blocking and tackling of the STIP are those projects that those chief engineers love so much, and we have to be that source of information in that conversation that they
Sure.
invariably have.
Well, this has been a great conversation.
Thank you.
Anyone
Thank you.
wondering about this, I think will be a little more enlightened after
This
this
is fun.
conversation. And it's our hope is, and you know, we have a real advantage right now. We have a robust industry, software developer industry, very competitive world. Open standards will lead to everyone sharpening their tools and
Exactly.
coming up with better solutions. It's exactly how the market should work. But the key to that market developing and prospering is for state DOTs to get to a commitment to go full digital
Right.
and begin the process of getting there. And a whole bunch of states have done that. I think
Yeah,
we're
don't
at a
be
real turning
scared.
point.
Don't be scared.
Don't be scared.
You got to jump in.
And a
You
lot
got to
of
jump
states
in. You got
are
to start
showing that.
one project. It starts with one project, and then it goes from there. There are states doing it, and they're being
it's a ripple
successful.
effect.
They're being successful with it. Caltrans is a great example of alternative delivery using digital delivery methodologies to facilitate alternative delivery projects. They went from like 25 CMGC projects in 2022 to like 125. I might be off on that, so Donna Berry, please hold me accountable. But
I think
it is that significant.
Donna Berry, who's the chief engineer, has a lot to be proud of. Because
Amen.
I think no organization can make this kind of progress without leadership at the top
Truth.
giving them that license and that ability. So I like to talk about, I always talked about everyday accounts as a federal highway as top down, bottom up.
Yes,
Top down wasn't enough.
Yeah.
right.
Bottom up, you have to have that buy-in from the frontline troops who deliver the program and deliver the projects, and of course, with the top endorsing, giving them cover, giving them. It's a function of risk aversion.
Yes.
If the folks on the front lines, the career people who are there year after year and director after director, if they feel they've got the support and backing of the top level management, they're going to be much more inclined to take those risks and advance those innovations
Absolutely.
and solutions. And I see that's happened, certainly happened at Caltrans in the last several years. So it's a good example of a state that's really taken it to
Yes.
another level. And there are a number of states we could talk about other examples as well, but we can't because we are out of time.
Thank you.
Righto.
But having you here
Thank you,
today
Greg.
and having this conversation at AASHTO is just, it's special. So
Yep.
thanks
Thank you
again.
so
and
much.
Thank you, Greg.
We'll be talking more.